Hi, Queen Wolf here. How are y'all doing? I hope all who celebrated had an amazing holiday. I have an update on the project, but before I get started, I want to make one thing clear. I received a transphobic comment on my previous video. All such comments will be reported and removed. It takes no effort to be a decent human being, and I see no reason to entertain such repulsive opinions, especially when they are directed at me. Most especially still when I have the ability to moderate the comments on my own videos. Now, with that in mind, let's get on with the update. Sadly, I have not worked on the tree much in the intervening time since the last video. I have updated the design a bit, which is what you're seeing here. I have the original and the prior version side by side, so you can see the difference. On the original, which is on the left, you'll notice that the second from the top tier featured a double grouping of branches, for lack of a better term. The second set has been removed. This was to allow for more height between the three tiers I'm using for the train sets. You'll see why in a moment. Now, I have completed the designs for each of the trains I'll be using on the tree. First up is this pirate's ship. As you can see, this thing is tall. The original design for the tree just would not have accommodated it, which is why I modified its original design. It's fortunate I was able to correct this issue so easily before I got so far into building this behemoth of a tree. But anyway, you'll notice the skull and crossbones in the Trans Pride colors. This is a Lego recreation of one of the designs I sell on TeePublic and Redbubble. The skull and crossbones, not the ship. The minifigures used in this one may change depending on which parts I can find. LDCAD, the software I'm using to build these, didn't have all the head and torso pieces I wanted, so that may affect the final result too. You will notice the sail is set low to the deck, and that does kind of make it resemble a Viking ship, but it was either that or create a much smaller design, and I'm sure you can deduct which option I decide to go with on that. The water skier may or may not stay. It really depends on if I can find a way to either add wheels without making it look awful, or else replace the rope with a wire heavy enough to support his weight. Alright folks, here we have the Star Wars themed train. For this one, I modified the existing designs the Lego group has for Luke's X-Wing and Vader's TIE Advanced Fighter. I extended the cockpit section of the TIE Fighter back, and it looks nearly identical on both sides, save for the front or back hatch. I shortened the bottom section of the wings and brought the wings in closer to the body to give the fighter more clearance on the sides. The wings on the X-Wings are shorter for the same reason. Both fighters have their own train motors. The intent is to have one pull the other and make it appear as if it is pursuing the other fighter. But with this design, I can alternate it so either can be in front. Before you ask, yes, the wings on the X-Wing do open to attack position. The mechanism is unfortunately a bit clunky, and it must be done for each wing separately, but it does work. My main intent is just to create opposable wings. I don't really care. This isn't intended to be touched that much, so I don't care about the clunkiness of the wings. Okay, originally I intended a kind of medieval carriage for the final train, but I didn't think it would be able to house all the necessary hardware, so I opted for another design, an Old West style locomotive pushing a DeLorean. Although I did change them a bit, the designs for the train and the DeLorean are not my own. I'll link to them in the description. I do realize the locomotive in Back to the Future is a little longer and has more wheels, but this version is pretty close, and I'm not going for 100% accuracy. The version I based it on is black and red instead of all black. I did make a few very small changes, not all of them visible, but it is super close to the original version. The DeLorean has more significant changes from the original, but it didn't deviate much even so I still feel original credit is due. I recreated the train scene at the climax of the film. Unfortunately, the minifigures are somewhat limited in how you can pose them. I had to find a way to attach the hoverboard to the DeLorean itself because I couldn't find a way to place Marty so that he could hold it and keep him in the car without looking like he was doing some kind of awkward gymnastics routine. um, I attached Doc Brown's legs to the side of the train itself to keep them from interfering with the wheels. I'm thinking I may experiment and see if I can cut out a trench coat for the Doc and a poncho for Marty, similar to the ones they wore in the film. Official Back to the Future Lego pieces do exist, but LDCAD doesn't have any of them in its parts library. I wasn't even able to find them in the unofficial library, so the license plate says 12:51 o'clock instead. If I can find the official piece for cheap, I may add it to the design when I build the physical model. On the other things, I mentioned this before, but I intend to populate this tree with a bunch of different figures and builds. Here you see one of the ones I'm most proud of, a Lego Stargate. I did take some cues from a couple similar designs I found online, but the way I connected each individual segment does seem to be quite unique, and I figured out how to make this all myself. Um, Lego doesn't create any actual military minifigures, so I went with the slacks and t-shirt look the team sometimes sports. I know there are some third-party companies and custom minifigure makers that do make military uniforms, so I may go down that route. The ramp took a little inspiration from other designs too, but I opted to think outside the box for the steps. I didn't want to make the design too big. I know the original ramp is a little longer, or probably about double the length if you're going by scale, but again, I didn't want it too long. The clamps were created entirely of my own design. I'm pretty pleased with how they turned out. And moving on, next up we have the long dead shade of the druid Alanon rising out of the Hades horn to speak to Par, Ren, and Walker Bow, the Olmsford descent. This is a recreation of the cover art for Scions of Shannara by Terry Brooks, and I think it turned out pretty well. Mr. Brooks is my inspiration for putting pen to paper and to take a jab at that whole writing thing that takes up so much of my time, so I definitely wanted to include some sort of tribute to him. In fact, I included two of them. And note on the blue flames, I'll likely need to find a way to support them and keep them from falling over, as they are pretty tall and there isn't much holding them in place. There are a couple of ideas I have in mind, but it'll be easier to test them when I'm building it, so I'm just going to wait until then. This one is my second tribute. It's a scene out of Elfstones of Shannara, the battle between the druid Alanon and the demon, the Dog Demore. Alanon is riding a rock, a giant seabird in the Shannara universe, named after the rocks from myth. The demon rides a giant bat-like creature. Now, I could be wrong. I don't believe Mr. Brooks ever gave the particular creature a name, but it's been a couple of years since I last read it. There was a short-lived television series based on the book, but to put it bluntly, it was terrible and deviated pretty heavily from the source material, so even if a name comes from that, I'm not sure I would consider it canon. And I don't even know if the bat creature appears in that series, to be honest. I tend to pretend it doesn't exist most of the time. Anyway, before I go off on too long of a tangent, I'll just get on with things. I did have the idea to recreate pixel art from NES era video games and hang them from the tree as ornaments, but after testing out a couple of designs, I realized they were far too big. So that idea was quickly abandoned. But I'll show them here for funsies. Here we have Tanuki Mario from the Super Mario Bros. 3 and Samus from the original Metroid. It's too bad I won't be able to use them. I rather liked how they turned out. If I ever own a home of my own, I have a dream of making a Lego room And it may be fun to hang something like this on the wall. So who knows? So who knows? Maybe I'll reuse these a few years down the line. Or a decade or so in today's housing market. Who knows? That's all I have to show today. I have plenty of other design ideas to add to the tree. One I'm particularly excited about is a Buffy the Vampire Slayer scene of Buffy slaying a vampire outside of the mausoleum in one of Sunnydale's cemeteries. I may use the Lego Friends figures for that one. I think that dichotomy between the cutesiness of the Lego Friends figures and Buffy rather fitting. Another is a machine, is the Dream Machine from Scooby-Doo and the Riddles of the Ring set with Bilbo Baggins and Golem. If I can find them cheap enough, either that or recreate them. Given the prices I've seen online, it will probably be the latter rather than the former. I may also recreate some scenes from my own writing, but I haven't really decided on which ones yet. I do tend to write some rather intense action sequences, so some of them would be hard to recreate, but we'll see what we can manage. I did also have the idea to print off some vinyl decals for use on minifigures or whatever Lego designs I make. I did a bit of research, and luckily, turns out the printer I have is actually pretty highly rated for that. As I'm already proficient with Photoshop, that does seem to be a viable option, but this is still just in the idea phase, and as yet I have done only a cursory bit of research. Now, that should wrap things up. Please subscribe and click that notification bell. And until next time, have a deliciously devious day. Goodbye.